All right, we are live. How's it going, guys? Hey, Maddie, 2414, Cream City Outdoors. Some people hopping on here. Hopefully, some of you guys saw we're gonna have Nicole on here. There she is. She's gonna join pretty good here. Hey, Lost My Lure, how you doing? Hey, Brett. Brett McComas just hopped on. What's up? Anyone been fishing lately? There's Kyle, and there's Nicole. We're going to get her on right here, right now. Should be hopping on here in a second. Hey, Nicole.
Hello.
How's it going tonight?
Good. How are you?
Good. Trying out the new studio here. I've kind of been working on it.
Yeah, it looks really good.
Yeah, thanks.
Working with a tripod myself, so I'm a little like...
Yeah, and I'm running a YouTube stream and a Instagram stream at the same time here. So the people on YouTube will be able to hear you, but they won't be able to see you. But all the Instagram people will see it too. So
perfect.
Kind of in transition, but eventually I'm going to be going to full YouTube, I think, in the future. But for now, the Instagram's been really fun. So.
Oh yeah, I always like joining on Instagram. It's easier for me, but I think YouTube might get a little bit bigger.
Yeah, eventually I think it will. And the nice thing about YouTube is the videos kind of live on too for a while, so people can go back and watch them again, and it's kind of turns it into a regular video on the channel, which is nice. So
yeah.
But yeah, the Instagram, I like the fact that we can just literally split the screen and have two people talking like so easy without any extra software. Whereas on YouTube, you have to have extra software to split the screen. So yeah, so it's coming around. I think YouTube's going to start that as well. But so anyway, we got a bunch of people on saying hi. Lots of my followers. Looks like a couple of yours too, which is cool.
Okay.
And we've never met in person. We've only chatted on in social basically before. But and I'd kind of like you to just give us maybe a background first of, I guess, where you grew up fishing and how you ended up in kind of the fishing niche a little bit, and especially the musky fishing niche.
Yeah, so I grew up and born, raised like Bloomer, Chippewa Falls area. Still live here. I grew up on a small creek, which I was really fortunate to do. My dad got me into fishing at a very young age, mostly just bluegill fishing. Once I got a little older and more comfortable handling fish on my own, I started fishing the creek that I grew up on that pretty much has everything in it, from trout, walleye, bass, everything. And that's where I kind of encountered my first muskie.
Okay.
I was fishing with a boyfriend at the time, like beginning of college, and I watched this big fish follow his lure, and I'm like, what the heck is that? I knew there was pike in there, but I knew of muskies as well, and he's like, oh, that was a muskie. I'm like, I thought they were just like pike. I didn't realize they got bigger and all that stuff. So I had went home and told my dad about this muskie. Like 2 days later, I'm like, I'm going to go catch that thing. And so I went down to the shore, casted out a Rapala, no leader. I just have like mono on him, usually bass fishing. And sure enough, it ate like my second twitcher right away, and it broke my line. And I was like, okay, I need a musky fish now. That was cool. It was probably like a 34-incher maybe, but it was pretty neat. So bought my first muskie rod. I bought 3 baits, and my dad and I started muskie fishing together, and it took me all season. It took me till September 3rd of my first muskie season to even see my first muskie and land one.
Okay.
And I was kind of hooked after that.
So were you fishing out of a boat with your dad then at that point?
Yeah, my dad and I fished out of his boat. We actually fished together today. We didn't see anything, but after him and I started muskie fishing together and I caught one and did it more, I was like, I want to be able to do this as often as possible. And that's kind of what transitioned me into kayak fishing.
Okay. So it was the accessibility factor.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
that makes sense.
And most of it was boats are kind of intimidating, especially for me. Like, that's a big investment. It's learning to back up a trailer. It's running a trolling motor all the time. It's just, they're big. You have to winterize them. They take up a lot of room. So I just wanted something that was smaller and a little easier and that I knew I could handle.
Yep. No, that makes sense. And you can handle one pretty well by now, I would imagine.
It took me a little while when I first got it. I just started bass fishing from it just to kind of give a feel for everything. Now it's just like second nature. It's like my second home almost. I'm in it 3 days a week just about during open season. So.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask you, how many days a week do you typically fish muskies? You would say 3?
Around 3 days a week. I work 3 days a week at my job. I'm a nurse. And then when I'm not fishing, when I'm not working, I'm pretty much out fishing. That's all I do.
Okay. Brett McComas is on, and he said that Nicole catches more and bigger fish than everyone in this chat combined. It's insane, but so awesome. Oh, that's funny. Brett's he likes to joke around, but he's not always joking. Like you do catch a lot of big fish. I mean, there's no doubt about it.
This season it's been a wild ride. I don't know what happened, but this season it just kind of clicked, and a lot of muskies have hit the bag. But then again, I took this whole week off to muskie fish, and I caught one muskie on Saturday, and I have not caught one or had the opportunity to catch one really all week long. So it's like the typical muskie fishing is like hitting for me.
Yeah, that's real muskie fishing, right?
Yes.
That's the real deal when you're fishing like days without a fish. Like, that's kind of how it goes sometimes. And there's the best muskie fishermen on the planet, and anglers will you just can't make them bite sometimes.
Right.
So, I want to get into kind of how the season's gone for you and what has been working for you, because I am a mediocre muskie angler at best, and I've not targeted them a lot. I've caught some on purpose here and there, but I multi-species fish, and as you know, there's so many species to chase in this area that I just don't put the time in typically that it takes to catch a lot of muskies. But I usually catch a couple a year, but I mostly get frustrated and then fish for something else.
I totally feel that.
But I do want to learn something, and you've put in many, many more hours muskie fishing than I have, and probably a lot of people on this stream have. And so I guess what I would like to know is what has been your top producing lure, I guess, this season, and tactic, like as far as where are you finding fish most often, and then what's actually triggering them, because I know a lot of guys have a really hard time actually triggering a bite. We all see fish, but getting them to bite, and especially out of a kayak when you're not elevated and you can't see them coming, and like I can't imagine doing a really nice figure 8 out of a kayak, but maybe you can. How do you trigger those fish, and what are you using?
So most of the time when I'm fishing smaller bodies of water, like 200-300 acre bodies of water. So I'm fishing more numbers lakes than size, but there is always the chance for a big one. And I like to fish weeds. Like, weeds is just what I'm confident in, whether it's like lily pads or cabbage. If I can find deep cabbage, I don't have side scan on my kayak. I just have down imaging. So sometimes finding those random, like, deeper patches of weeds can be a little bit difficult. I have to stumble across them. But weeds are probably the easiest. I fish a lot of shorelines, points. My go-to lure is probably a bucktail. The Muskie Frenzy Stager bucktails have been just incredible for me the last couple seasons. They're super easy to work. The one thing in the kayak is whenever you're working like a rubber bait, that's a pull pause and it's heavy, you're moving that kayak a ton every time you rip that bait. So, typically you're in a boat, you're going to rip to your dominant strong side. So when if a fish eats, you get that good hook set. I'm constantly having to switch up and rip a different direction. So I love rubber baits, but they're just tougher to keep fish pinned.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, bucktails were super, super productive this season. Same with topwater, kind of that midsummer, late summer, early fall. That was a great topwater time for me. And a lot of these fish do eat in the 8. I'm fortunate in my kayak. I sit up high, so I can see these fish following pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
And my only thing is I have to sit kind of kittywampus in my kayak. I can't really keep myself facing straight ahead and kind of turn my whole body. So I do get that good reach into my figure 8s.
Okay.
So I get wide turns. And yeah, the figure 8 has been the area where I've had most of my bites come. Blades, it's easier to keep them pinned. I've lost probably just as many fish as I've caught this season just because of topwater bites in the figure 8. Everyone always says wait to set the hook until you feel that fish. And there's just something about when they eat in the figure 8 on a topwater for me that I cannot wait for that hook set. And I know what I'm doing wrong, but it's tough sometimes.
Oh yeah. That takes so much restraint it's just like topwater bass fishing or anything, fishing frogs. I fished frogs for years and years, and it took me literally years before I actually would wait until I felt that fish on the frog before I would send the hooks home, because they miss them all the time. Yep, it's the same thing.
And muskies will miss topwater, and if you set that hook, you just wreck it because it spooks them. But if you just keep going, I've had them try to hit my topwater 3 times before they've actually got hooks in them. And it's just wild to me because they're just so dialed in on that bait.
They just keep chasing it.
They're not always going to be like that. They're not always that aggressive.
So the bucktail you were talking about, what size are you typically throwing? Is that like a double 10? Is that a smaller bait?
So usually in the beginning of the season, I'll start out with an 8-9 Stager blade. So it has 2 different size blades on it, just a different vibration in the water from what these fish usually are used to. And then as the season progresses, I'll go up to double 9s, Stager 9. So it's 2 different kinds of 9 blades and 10 blades I'll throw once in a while. But
okay. So is that like a Colorado and a willow leaf together?
It's something along those lines. I can't remember the exact name of the blades that are on it, but
yeah, I haven't looked too closely at those, but I'll have to check them out. So you think it's the vibration, the unique vibration of the 2 blades triggers more fish?
Yeah. Okay. I think it's just something they don't see quite as often. You have your people throwing your Muskie Mayhem makes great bucktails, and I throw them too. But if they're just 2 double 8 blades, they're not different size. They're not different blades, so they just kind of vibrate the same, and it's just something a little more unique, I guess.
Okay. Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Are the lakes you're fishing pretty high pressured?
Yeah.
Okay.
The lakes I'm on, they get quite a bit of pressure, and it just might be a mental thing for me, but a confidence thing. But honestly, you got to throw what you're most confident in, because you're just it's all a mindset. Muskie fishing is a huge mind game. So if you're not in it and confident in what you're doing, it's tough. It's tough to do. For sure.
Yeah. And I was just talking to, I don't know, I think you joined for a little bit when I was talking to Scott Mackner last week, 330 Maniac. And we were talking about the exact same thing, just for any fish, that confidence catches fish. It just, there's something about throwing a bait you're confident in that works. Even if the bait's not perfect, sometimes the confidence factor still matters,
Yeah.
And that's probably why I don't catch a lot of muskies, because I have a whole tackle box full of muskie lures, and I'll throw them, only about 3 of them am I really confident in, but I try and use them all just because I have them, and half the time I don't know what I'm doing. So
yeah. Well, that's the only way. I never used to throw rubber baits for probably the first couple years I muskie fished. And then I just started, if I caught a fish one day, I'd be like, okay, cool. I'm going to throw something I'm not used to now for a little while and just get the feel for it. And that's,
sure.
Now rubber baits are one of my favorites to throw. It's just I can't keep fish pinned on them very well in the kayak, which is a bummer, but it's all part of the game in the kayak.
There's a lot of leverage on a rubber bait, a lot of weight that they can throw around, and yeah, it's hard to keep them pinned on those anyway, unless they choke them. But any of you guys in the chat too, make sure if you have questions for Nicole that you pipe up, because we're here to talk. So I don't see too many questions yet, but I haven't invited you to ask them yet. Andy Schutte said he met you one time chasing sturgeon somewhere.
Okay.
He remembers. My buddy Chris Hagness, I'm sure you've seen him chatting on here before, but he really catches a lot of muskies as well out of a boat, but he's very tuned into the moon phases and stuff, and like religiously. He's one of those guys that will live and die by the moon phase. What's your thought on that from what you've seen?
I do watch the moon phase, and my biggest thing with the moon phase is if I know there's a lake, like I'll use the lake I caught my 50 on. I caught my 50-incher on a new moon on this lake. So now whenever there's a big moon phase, like a full moon or a new moon, I try to hit that lake if weather permits. Otherwise, when I'm just fishing in my local lakes, in the kayak, since I can't just run and gun to different spots, I kind of plan my day around my best spot and if I can be on that spot at the moon phase. Yeah. So I'll fish my least productive areas outside of the moon phase and my most productive areas during like peak moon rise, moon set, all of that stuff.
So you just try and kind of stack your chips basically on those hot spots on the hot moon phase. Yeah, that makes sense.
Or if there was a fish I rose earlier in the day, I'll try to be back on that spot like right at peak moon.
Yeah, and that's a good plan. Brett McComas, in true walleye fashion, asked, "What's the biggest walleye you ever accidentally caught while muskie fishing, and what did it eat?"
I've never caught a walleye when I was muskie fishing.
Really?
I've had 2 walleyes follow baits in the figure 8, which is mind-blowing to me. But this spring I had a fairly large walleye, I would guess low to mid-20s, follow a swimming dog. I don't know if you're familiar with the swimming dog.
Big swim bait.
It was a smaller swimming bait, not the bigger size. But it followed it a couple turns of the 8 before it disappeared, which was weird. And I had one actually on Saturday, a small walleye, follow it was like a spinner bait with a big grub on the back. It followed that a couple turns as well, but it just kept nipping the tail. It actually wasn't committing to the whole bait. Okay. But
that's cool to see. It's fun to see that white tail coming in.
Yes.
It's kind of crazy. I actually did catch a walleye on a bucktail up in Canada on Shoal Lake, which is off the northwest side of Lake of the Woods. I was throwing a bucktail along the shoreline. It was like a probably 26-inch, kind of long and skinny walleye. Just absolutely annihilated it. It was pretty cool. But they're a different breed of walleyes up there. I mean, that's a whole different ball game in Canada.
Yeah, you hear people catching them even around here sometimes on their muskie baits, but I only catch like largemouth and smallmouth and pike on my muskie baits when I'm not catching muskies.
We got a couple more questions. Do you use many swim baits for muskies, as in like paddle tails?
I use like the swimming dog. The swimming dog and Poseidons are like the swimming baits I'm going to use when I'm targeting muskies. I don't use anything really smaller than that. The swimming dog, the smaller size of it, actually worked really well around opener for me. Taps and Tackle, which is a bait lure shop, has some like 3D paint printed ones that look exactly like a crappie. Like
I've seen those. Yep.
And I caught 2 muskies, lost one, and had like 4 other follows on my first day out muskie fishing this season.
That's
and it was good. Just like they were hot on that bait. It just looked so similar to what they were chasing. There was crappies up in some shallow reeds. Yep. And they were going crazy for it.
Yep. I've seen that same pattern early season with bass. Like as soon as you get those first few nice days and it warms up those ultra shallow weed bays, especially if you get a warm wind blowing in where it blows that surface water into the bay and it warms up like 10 degrees above those little schools or those big schools of small panfish just crowd into those bays, and all the game fish just absolutely crush those things. And I'm sure muskies are sitting in there with them too, but we've had just unbelievable days on those early spring warm patterns like that for all kinds of fish. That's pretty fun.
Mm-hmm.
It just concentrates the fish like so much in the spring.
Yeah. And to see, it was wild because the spot I fished that day that I had all the action on is a spot I never typically fish.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a lot of confidence in it, but I kept seeing all these panfish surfacing up in these reeds, and I'm like, you know what? Like, let's just give it last-ditch effort. And just to see how many muskies were concentrated in that area, too, was wild. Because usually you think of muskies, you see one every so often.
If you see one, you expect to see no more in that area.
Right, exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's kind of cool. That's an unusual event for muskies for sure. Any tips? 1967 Kevin says, any tips for muskie fishing from shore? Have you done much muskie fishing from shore?
I don't do much shore fishing for muskies. I know I fished a couple dams. Dams are great places to kind of start. It's just a lot of work for me to think of like hauling all my stuff because I'm going to want to take a whole tackle box because that's just the kind of person I am. Me narrowing down baits is just not really something I'm good at. But
yep, I agree. I have fished muskies from shore a little bit, a fair amount actually, and I'm the same way. Like, I got my net over my shoulder full of stuff, and I've got 2 rods, and then I've got my giant tackle box like slung over my shoulder, trying to hobble down the hill to because it's the same for me. I can't leave anything behind. But my recommendation, if you are fishing from shore for muskies, do your best to get in a spot where you have deep enough water directly in front of you that you can figure 8 from shore, because it's the exact same muskie that you're fishing in a boat. And if you can't get them into some sort of a triggering maneuver in front of you in the water, you're going to have follows and they're just not going to hit. But that's how I caught my biggest muskie from shore, was in a figure 8 off of a break wall. So I actually had to reach over the railing on the break wall and do my figure 8 over the railing. And like the second turn, he just crushed it right there. So, and that was like a 40-inch fish, something like that. But that's my recommendation. I've caught smaller ones doing the same thing. Actually, not that this summer I was fishing bass, and I had a bass kind of swipe at a little tiny crankbait. It was a Euro tackle crankbait. It was one of those Z vibers, and it missed it. And so I went into a figure 8 just to see if I could get the bass to hit. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a muskie came and hit it. Like, just because it was in a figure 8, it just had to eat it, because there's just something about that. Even a small bait doing that maneuver, muskies they hate that. I don't know what it is about them, that whole thing, but it's pretty fascinating predator behavior, really.
I was like, that thing looks confused. I'm just gonna eat it.
Yep. Yeah, it was so funny. Matt
They're
Stewart.
Finicky, though. It's wild. I was fishing for walleye and bass. Well, bass fishing, but I had hooked a walleye on a spinnerbait, and muskie season was not open, but I had probably a 40 to 42-inch muskie follow my walleye in.
Mm-hmm.
And it was crazy to see the walleye react at the boat, because I did figure 8 it a little bit just to see what the muskie would do, and that walleye played dead. It wouldn't move a fin. So I just was dragging it through the water, and then the muskie swam off, and then the walleye started to fight again.
But the
muskie never bit it. So it's weird to see the fish react to the muskies too. It's like that walleye knew, if I move an inch, I'm getting eaten.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I never would have guessed. I would have thought it would be freaking out, but
yeah, it didn't. It just,
unless
cool. It was like, this is my time, I'm done, and it just gave up. I'm not really sure, but
well, seeing as you brought that story up, I was fishing pike and bass and walleyes. I cast a lot of small swim baits. Anytime after like July, I throw a ton of like 4 and 5 inch swim baits, and I was casting those, catching pike, catching bass, and I was just totally not unaware of what was going on. I caught a probably 25-inch pike. I mean, a decent eater, and I was reaching down to grab it by the gills. I didn't want to net it, and get all tangled up. So I'm reaching down, and this is before I was filming, which is just so sad because what happened next on film would have been epic. I was literally about this far, maybe 6 inches from grabbing that fish, and a muskie came straight up on it. It must have been laying on the bottom right under my boat in like 12 feet of water, and it just came straight up and grabbed that pike this far from my hand while I'm leaning over the side of my boat, and the whole entire muskie came out of the water, like this far in front of my face with the pike in his teeth. I mean, it was insane. It was probably a 42, 43, 44-inch muskie, and it ate a 25-inch pike like no problem. But man, did that thing want to kill it. It was just unreal. If I'd had my camera rolling,
they're vicious sometimes when they eat stuff. And pike are becoming more people are using pike now as musky bait instead of suckers, because a pike will live in the warm water, whereas a sucker will die usually right away if it's warm out. So a lot of people are putting pike on quick set rigs for muskies now.
Totally makes sense. I mean, they eat them all the time, I'm sure, in the wild. So, and they're much hardier than a sucker, like you said. Even in cold water, they probably last longer and struggle more.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Matt Stewart says, "Hey," he said he caught a walleye on a bucktail too, which is, I think a lot of people have. Let's see here. How about topwaters? Yeah, give us the rundown on your topwater setup, maybe quick.
My most used topwaters are prop style topwaters. Walk the dog is just kind of hard to work in the kayak, just with how much the kayak moves. So prop style is what I use. Like Lake X Fat Bastards are one of my go-tos. That topwaters produced so many fish for me. And then I usually keep my topwater on the top of the water when I go into my figure eight. Some people like to take it subsurface, and that works better for them. I just have more confidence keeping it up on the surface. I suppose if I took it subsurface when they ate, I wouldn't freak out as bad and pull it away from them. But
yeah, but maybe they wouldn't keep chasing it either. Who knows?
Yeah. And most of the time when I'm bringing my topwater in, I will go into an L turn as my first turn and then convert that into the loop of the figure eight, just because sometimes that sharp 90-degree turn will trigger them right away.
Yep, I've done that too.
That doesn't do it. They almost always eat on that first outside turn.
Okay.
From what I've experienced anyways.
So when you're fishing a topwater, are you figure eighting it every cast, or are you just only figure eighting it if you see a fish?
Every cast.
Okay.
I still figure eight. Yep.
Does that go for everything?
Huh?
Does that go for everything pretty much for you?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, always. Because I've had fish come in deep on topwater and then come up and smash it on that outside turn where you didn't see them waking. Usually, if they're following hard, they'll put up that big wake behind the bait, but not always.
Sure. Yeah, when I've thrown topwater for muskies, I tend to get lazy and I'll retrieve the cast and I'll do an L turn, but then I never really finish it unless I see a fish. But maybe I need to start finishing the 8 instead of just doing that L at the end. Yeah. That sounds like good advice.
I feel like if I let myself start letting my guard down, it's going to continue and then I'm going to get into bad habits. So I usually try to do one full figure eight every time I'm fishing. Maybe not a full figure eight with topwater, one big turn, but
okay. So discipline. You're disciplined. You just keep doing it even if you don't feel like it. Yeah. Just so you don't get bad habits.
Yep.
That's smart. PA Trout Fisherman says, I've seen 5 laying side by side in a creek by our house waiting. crazy. They were 10 feet away in 4 to 5 feet of water. Yeah. My guess is you got cold water in that creek and they were trying to get out of the heat, most likely. I've seen that up here too. He said, I love watching Nicole's content. Spring Bear 63 says they've seen you in action. You're remarkable. Matt Stewart says we got to hit the Amnicon for muskies. Yeah, there's muskies. Oh, I think he's talking. Well, no, he said river. So yeah, there is muskies in the river and the lake both. So JB Life Photos said, what exactly is figure eight? Is that like working a top water for bass? I'll let you explain what a figure eight is, because there's some people on here who don't muskie fish. They might not even know what that means.
Okay, so muskie fishing, muskies are pretty curious, so they won't always just eat your lure like bass and pike usually will. They'll follow it, and a figure eight is a maneuver that you do with your rod and your lure to try to trigger that fish at the boat. So when you're bringing your lure in and you get it right up to the boat, instead of just taking it out of the water and wrecking any chance at a following fish, you're going to turn it into a figure eight or like an infinity style loop. Just draw an 8 in the water. And typically what you're going to want to do is slow that bait down on that outside turn. And when that bait turns, that muskie's going to see it as it's possibly getting away, and that's going to trigger it to bite. So I like to slow my lures down in the outside turn. When I go into a straightaway, I'll speed it up just a little bit and then hang it in the next outside turn. You can also do like an oval or a big circle, kind of whatever is comfortable for you. If it's a large fish, an oval is probably even better to do, because if you turn too sharp on your figure eight and cut that fish off, if it doesn't have enough room to turn on your bait, sometimes it'll just swim off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good advice. And when you say a big fish, you're talking like upper 40s?
Yeah, upper 40s to bigger.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
What are the water temps looking like? Have you been out in the last couple days?
Yeah, so I've been out every day, and they were 50 earlier this week. They're down to about 49 today.
Okay, so they haven't dropped much.
No.
Okay. And you're in the Minocqua area? Is that right?
No, I'm over north of Eau Claire.
Oh, north of Eau Claire. So you're really close to me then. I'm in Spooner area.
Okay.
Yep.
Yep.
So, okay.
I drove up through that way the last 2 days, muskie fishing up north.
Mm-hmm. Yep. A lot of good muskie lakes up north of Spooner and west and east and every direction, basically.
All over.
Yeah.
All
yep.
over.
For sure. What was it that made you concentrate on muskie fishing? We kind of went over that in the beginning, but basically she just saw her first muskie and it was like, I got to get me some of those.
Yeah.
Right.
I kind of like the chase. Mm-hmm. I like that you have to work for them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of why I like doing like fishing from a kayak too, because I know I'm putting in the work. I'm the one doing it. Mm-hmm. So, and I get like that gratification from it. And when it all comes together, it's the adrenaline rush. When those fish, when the big ones, when all of them hit the net, even when I get a follow, it's just that like surge of adrenaline that kind of goes through you. You get the shakes. It's almost probably like buck fever, but I don't hunt, so I don't really know.
It's totally exactly the same. No, I do hunt, and that's exactly what it is. It's like your nerves are nerves of steel until that fish is in the net or that buck's on the ground, and then you're shaking uncontrollably, and you're like lightheaded and
and I like black out when I get a big fish. My 50-incher, I don't remember anything. I remember seeing something hit my lure and setting the hook, and I don't remember any of the fight.
I believe it. Yeah.
So it's just like
it's exactly the same thing. Like hunting, when I'm shooting at a deer, like a big buck with a rifle, I don't ever remember reloading or jacking another shell in. I don't remember any of that. I don't remember taking the safety off. I don't remember squeezing the trigger, because you're just so laser focused that your brain just blocks out everything unnecessary. It's crazy how that happens.
Yeah.
But same thing with muskie fishing, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Here's a great question. from Brett. And I was actually going to ask this. How do you spell it? Musky or Muskie? It's the great debate.
Muskie.
Yes, that's what I know. That is the correct spelling. However, I would say it's more common for people to spell it with a Y incorrectly.
Yeah.
It's just much more common. But that's actually the word for like a musky odor or a smell with the Y, technically. And Brett says, because I swear I'm the only one that thinks musky with a Y looks weird and is actually a word that describes a smell. So he said the same thing. Exactly.
Yep.
That's awesome.
He's right. I agree with him.
Yep. And he said he's done now. No, you can keep piping up, Brett, anytime. Let's see. Tomar flutes. I'm not sure what that one means. Kayaking, my flute, and 3 rods, 1 bait. So he must be trolling. I've seen muskies eat ducklings. Yeah. Have you seen them? Have you seen a muskie actually eat another animal or a fish while you're out fishing?
No. I can only assume that it was a muskie going after a baby loon, but I'm not positive. It could have been a pike or something, but I did see something blow up on baby loons and like the parents just went crazy out on the water, but I've never seen them eat anything else.
Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to think if I have. I mean, I've had them certainly grab fish off of my line many times, but I can't think of any time I've actually seen one eat something else out on the water. But I know other people who have, for sure. See them grab ducks and whatnot. Let's see, what else do we have here? Figure eights are definitely a must, yes. Gear ratio question on your reels. What's your preferred gear ratio? That's a good question.
I use high gear ratio, so the Tranks 400 high gear. I'm not even sure what the numbers are on it. I think it's like 7.
Yeah, I believe that's 7 something to 1.
7, 6, 7. I don't know for sure, but I like high gear ratios. I can always reel slower, but in the kayak, when you're working baits that are already moving towards you, and then your kayak's moving towards them, the quicker you can pick up the line, the faster.
Yeah.
Especially with hook sets too, because you set the hook, and the kayak like rocks with the hook set, so it'll rock back, which is great. But then when it rocks forward and you lose that slack, the faster you can reel, better.
That's brutal. Yeah. What is the biggest fish you've ever seen? Like, of course, you didn't measure the biggest fish you've ever seen, probably, but what's your guess?
Well, the biggest I've seen that was measured was a 53 I netted for someone, which was massive. And I've seen one that probably was pushing that. It was over 50 for sure, but I was not musky fishing. I was smallmouth bass fishing, and I just happened to look down, and it was very clear water, and this massive muskie was just sitting there. And I did pitch a jig at it. I don't know what I would have done if it would have ate on my medium light rod, but it did not. But it was huge.
Yeah, that's always when you see them, is when you don't have a musky rod, your biggest one. Yeah, I've actually seen 3 muskies that I know are over 52, and I don't even know how big they were, and they were all in the same lake. And of course, I'm not going to name it because I'm trying to catch one of them right now. But this is over a few years, And one was verified by my buddy Chris, and he's caught at least 10 muskies over 50 inches in his career, and 2 or 3 of them were just last year over on Minnetonka.
Oh, wow.
And he was with me. He actually brought that fish in to the boat, and it kind of lazily went into the figure 8, and it was so big, just so stinking big. I mean, he estimated 53 to 54 inches, and the girth on that thing was pretty fantastic too.
They don't even look real when they're that big in the water and they're following a bait.
No, it's more like a shark than a fish. Like I just got out for 2 hours last weekend. I had about 2 hours to fish, and I was throwing a double 10, and I had suckers out, and I got about a 40 to really lazily follow. It was like just kind of cruising behind my bait about 3 or 4 feet behind it. And as soon as I got near the boat, it just sank out of sight. Well, then I switched to a Suic and I moved to a different spot, and I was just twitching that Suic, and it was a calm spot on the lake and I could see really well. It was really clear. And all of a sudden, like, there's just this massive shape behind it. And I was like, oh, here we go. Just twitch. And that thing came probably within 15 feet of my boat, and then just stopped, and the lure kept going, and it just sank. And that one was one of those fish that just is like, that was not even a fish. That was like a freaking shark. It was so big. So I know where that one lives now, and that's another one I've got to go back after. But have you fished Suics much? Have you done much like glide bait, twitch bait fishing?
I don't. I find getting the cadence down right hard for me in the kayak. In the boat, I fished them a little bit, but otherwise I don't throw them too often.
I can see that, because it's kind of, you almost have to have your rod pointed down at the water with them, and then you're kind of pulling down, and that would be kind of hard out of a kayak, I can see. Yeah,
I'd have to be able to stand, and I can really only stand and fish in mine if it's calm. If it's windy, it just blows me away too fast.
Yep, that totally makes sense.
Yeah, it's wild, those big fish, though, that when they just come up and they sink away, they don't even swim away. They just disappear.
Yep, that's what this one did.
A mid-40s do that to me 2-3 days ago, Tuesday. It just followed into the figure 8, and then it just sat there. And I literally figure 8'd around this fish, and then it just sunk to the depths. And you're like, what just happened?
You're like, what could I have done? What could I have possibly done to make that thing bite?
Yes.
Yep, I've been there. That same river spot. I mean, I had one chase a smallmouth in, and then it just sat there in front of me for an hour. Just right there. I could see it. It was laying there, and I tried every bait I had, bringing it across its nose, figure 8 over the top of it. It's just like, what are you trying to do, man? I already know you're there. I'm not going to bite anything. You know, they get pretty smart.
Oh, yeah.
Main ice fishing enthusiast said, just so I'm clear, when they hit a figure 8, there's only like 4 feet of line off the tip of the pole. Well, there's a lot less than that.
Yeah. There's like, probably your leader, which is usually around 12 inches, and then maybe 2 to 3 inches of line.
Yep. You want as little line off the end as possible, really, pretty much. I mean, you want that like 12, 14 inches, would you say? 15 maybe? Yep. Yeah, that's pretty wild. When you hook a 40-plus inch fish with 14 inches of line off the end of your rod, it's pretty nuts.
Yeah.
The water explodes, and it's pretty chaotic for sure.
That's when knowing how to free spool is like a very valuable thing to know how to do.
Okay.
Because being able to free spool a muskie when they're that close after they eat in a figure 8 and keep the tension without having your reel explode on you, that's what I have to do to be able to net my fish. Just, I guess I could dial my drag back and try to like hand line some line out, but
then you're two-handed.
Yeah.
So you got a net in one hand, and you're trying to balance in a kayak, and you need to like make sure that you've got enough line off the end. So you click the button and you hold your thumb on it on the spool and just let out as much as you need to with your thumb. Then, right? Okay. Yeah, I was wondering how the mechanics of netting a muskie by yourself in a kayak work exactly. Can you go over that?
It's a lot of sweet talking the muskies into the net.
Yeah.
I sweet talk them a lot. And trying to get them to turn. The most important thing is if I can get that fish to turn and kind of swim at me, then I can scoop with my other hand and get them. Because trying to net a muskie tail first is almost impossible. Yeah,
I would think so.
So it's a lot of patience, and I free spool, and sometimes they'll get a little bit away from me, and then I have to set the net down and try to balance the net on the side of the kayak, reel up slack, and then repeat the process.
So how many times have you missed a muskie and still caught it? What's your record? with the net.
Like missed it with the net
Yeah.
and landed it.
Yeah.
A lot. Most of them I miss it the first time I try to net it, and then just have to wait for it to kind of swim back around at me.
Yeah.
It's chaotic, to say the least.
Yeah. So what's your favorite net for that job? I mean, I'm assuming it's got to be pretty quality light net to be one-handing it out of a kayak.
I use a Stowmaster net.
Okay.
I'm not sure if you're familiar, but it's one that you can collapse like the rod handle down and then it folds in half.
Mm-hmm.
So I just use one of those. It's a little heavy.
Mm-hmm.
I used to use it was my dad's muskie net. It floated. It was super lightweight, weighed hardly anything, and I could keep that behind me in my kayak,
Mm-hmm.
and then I could just bring it forward. But with my net now, it's a little heavy. I have to keep it on the front of my kayak, so I just have to like slide it off to get to use it.
Yeah.
The first time I had it behind me and I hooked a muskie and I tried to lift my net up and over my GoPro and all of that, I ended up losing the fish.
Okay. That would be tricky. Yeah, because you've got a GoPro. I'm assuming you got a GoPro on like a some kind of powered mount to keep.
Yeah, I just have it on a RAM mount, and then I run like a 6-foot long charging cable into my front hatch to Dakota Lithium, like the box that you can plug in USBs to.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And you basically, I mean, I'm assuming muskie fishing, you pretty much just have to run the camera the whole time, right?
Yeah, I put mine on loop mode, which has saved me. I never knew about loop mode for like the first year I had GoPros on my kayak, so I'm like burning through SD cards and battery life and all of that. But yeah, I just run mine on a 5-minute loop.
Mm-hmm.
And then once I get a fish in the net, I'll stop the camera. And then once I get the fish unhooked and I'm ready, I'll restart it just so I can hold it up for some quick pictures and really shot.
Yep, that makes sense. That's kind of how I've done it too. I film a ton, like my YouTube channel, I pretty much have filmed probably 90% of it with my iPhone.
Okay.
Believe it or not. And that's been a really useful tool for me because I've got a mount that I can mount the iPhone on any of my GoPro accessories. So I just have a clamp adapter, and so I can like put a gooseneck on there, and I can clip my phone here, I can clip it there. It's super easy to check footage, to see the picture you're getting. And it takes, really high quality video, and it's not wide, it's not like ultra wide like a GoPro, so it's a little bit more cinematic, professional, but yet it's super easy to use it. Now you can't do loop mode on a phone, but it takes amazing slow-mo, and it really is I haven't had to buy a camera for my YouTube channel.
Yeah, and that's awesome because that's when you start thinking of YouTube and all that and angles, and it can get to be expensive when you think you need the fancy stuff, but phones are getting to be more incredible every year. So
yep, and I've got a GoPro Hero 9 that I use for my underwater footage now. That's so nice because you don't have to have a case on it. You just throw it on a stick and stick it in the water, and away you go. And if I do use like a chest cam, that's what I use typically too. But my iPhone's been a awesome tool for what I'm doing. We have a question from Tim Wallen. What type of line do you use and what pound test? That is a good question.
So on my casting rods, I'm using Suffix 832, 80-pound braid. And then for my sucker rods, I'm using 100-pound.
And that's 832 as well?
Yeah.
Yep, that's exactly what I have on my rods right now. I've got 80-pound Suffix 832, and it's just such a good line. I've had amazing luck with that all the way from 6-pound up to 80. Yep.
I used to run Power Pro, and I don't know if I got a really bad batch of it one year or if it just was the line, but I casted off like 2 or 3 lures, not even on backlashes, just cast, and there went the lure flying, and it's just painful.
If it's not a top water, it makes you want to cry.
Never on top water. It was bucktails or rubber baits, and that is just, it's tough, but
Yeah, for sure.
Better to break off casting a lure than on a fish. So
Yep.
I'll take it.
Yep. I've casted off a couple musky lures myself. Yes, I have for sure. And backlashes. Oh, I just got one. I was musky fishing for like 3 hours the other day. Never saw fish, and I'm like, I'm so tired of this. I'm just gonna hit the river spot on the way home.
Mm-hmm.
It was a new river spot, and I did not see that birch branch hanging over over the top of me, and I just sent it, and it sent so hard it snapped the lip off of my stick bait, snapped the lip off, and my spool just blew up into and completely wasted the line. I mean, there was no getting that one out, so I just took the knife to it. Those are the worst, like especially with 80-pound, like any kind of good braid like 832, 80-pound is very expensive. It's not cheap, and you end up having to cut all that off the spool. It just makes you want to cry.
Yeah, I'm so bullheaded. I'll spend like so much time just digging out birds' nests because it's like I'm not cutting this line. But I guess stubborn. I haven't had one to that extent where it was like a complete lost cause.
Yep, that's where I was at. So Suffolk, I'm going to be spending more money. Don't worry. Muskie fisherman here, one of the best, most informative lives on muskie fishing. That's awesome. That's good to hear. Hey, Eurotackle just joined. We're both affiliated with Eurotackle.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on here too, is just to talk a little bit about like what are some of your other favorite fish to fish for? Like what's your second, third, fourth favorite fish? I know muskies are your favorite, but what comes next?
Boy. I consider myself a multi-species angler, but I'm pretty much dependent on the time of year. So like early spring, as soon as like early trout opens, if the trout streams are open, I love to trout fish.
Mm-hmm.
Then as soon as the lakes open up, I love largemouth bass. I love bass fishing, pan fishing, and then muskie opens, muskies. And then as soon as ice up, I'm targeting panfish, pike, and bass again.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say probably bass and panfish are going to be my next most favorite fish to target.
Sure. So you're not much of a walleye fanatic.
No.
Okay.
I would love to fish walleye more. I just don't know a whole lot about targeting them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this winter my goal is going to be to try to target them through the ice. I know a couple really good walleye lakes from talking to walleye anglers while I'm muskie fishing. It's amazing how much they'll tell you when you're not targeting what they're fishing for.
Isn't it?
So I know a couple of good lakes to try at least. I
Okay.
don't really know how to target them, but I'll figure it out on the fly, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, walleyes are challenging too, which I think you'll like because if you like muskies, ice fishing for walleyes is similar. It's just like some days they just kick your butt and there's nothing you can do about it, and then other days they're fired up and you're just smashing them and it's a blast. But then they move. They're always moving, and they never are where you thought they were going to be, and they're not where you left them last time, and then you got to find them again, and they can be a real pain in the butt, but it is rewarding especially when you catch a big one. There's just something about a big walleye coming through a hole in the ice that you cannot. It's like a big muskie. You just can't get it out of your head once it happens. Just seeing that big old glowing eye and that grin on their face with those big sharp teeth, and then just seeing that white tail. I don't know. There's something about it. You'll like it. Yeah, once you get into it.
I got to fish for them a couple times. Upper Red Lake is like, I love it because I can catch walleye there.
Yeah.
Early ice. But I got to fish Little Bay Denok with some friends a few years ago, and I landed a 27 on a tip up, which was insane. Just watching that big of a walleye come up through the ice was like,
it's cool.
What are you? I've never seen anything like it before, and they're fat up there too. They're heavy fish. So that was neat.
Did you fish Red Lake with Nicole Stone?
Yeah,
I thought so last year.
Fished last year.
Yeah, I thought so. And you guys did pretty decent. It looked like trip.
We fished during the day, and then we got one of the ice shacks for overnight. We landed a few during the night too. There was one big one. It was probably like a 22, 23 that was a good one that came up in the middle of the night. And then the next day I just went out by myself and had a heyday. It was just one after another. And
oh yeah, you went live. You went live that day.
I went live during that because it was just like fish after fish. I'm like, I was so excited, and I'm by myself, so I'm just geeking out alone. And I was like, someone needs to experience this with me because I'm going crazy.
That's awesome. Yeah, I remember that. I was at work and I saw you went live, and I'm like, all right, I gotta see what's going on here. So I clicked in for a little bit.
Never happened before.
Yeah, exactly. I've not done much lives while fishing either, because it's just you're so focused. It's hard to even think about going live while you're fishing. But
yeah,
I think it'd be fun to do more. Like when you're on a good bite, it's cool to let other people in on it, kind of.
Yeah. So, that's kind of my hopes for this year, early ice upper red. I'm planning on going back, hopefully for more than just a day and a half, 2 days, and maybe do some live stuff up there again, just because it's cool to. I think it'd be cool to sit and watch someone hammer and fish. So
yeah, if you can't be there, the second best thing is watching somebody else hammer them, I guess. So
yeah, at least this year I will have more Z Vibers, because that was like the Euro Tackle Z Viber was like the top producer until I got bit off by what I'm assuming had to have been a huge pike.
Yep.
I know they grow big pike up there, and something hit my bait, and I could hardly move it, and fought it forever, and it broke me off.
Yep, there's some big pike in red for sure. Yeah, the Z Vibers. I actually have to make a Euro Tackle order here in the next week or so. I got to stock up because obviously there's a lot of new baits too that I've got to pick up. I haven't got any of the darters yet, but those are going to be awesome.
Yeah.
I have a good feeling that those are going to be fish slayers. But man, the Z Vibers last year for me were absolutely a bass killer. I mean, I caught so many bass on the 1/8 ounce Z Vibers in bluegill. It was ridiculous. I mean,
I'll have to get one because I tried so hard to target bass through the ice last year, and you were mopping up on them for a while.
Yeah, it was fun, and it was all camera fishing, so you were watching all the bites on camera, and the key was the Z Viber. I mean, we could not catch them on almost anything else, not with near the consistency of that Z Viber. There's just something about that bluegill color and that size, and they never crushed it almost ever. They just come up and they bite the bottom hook. They just barely open their mouth and just kind of nip that bottom hook, and it's so small and sticky, you hook them almost every time. But that one, I can't say I've ever fished a bait through the ice that was that specifically good for one species of fish. So if you want to target bass, I would definitely recommend that. Although we have had some incredible days on jigging wraps for bass. When they're aggressive under the ice, jigging wrap fishing for largemouth is an absolute blast because they'll actually hit it pretty aggressively on jigging strokes. Yeah. So you can rip it and send it way out, and then as soon as it stops, they'll just smash it right there. And that's a really fun time, but it doesn't always happen every day. Like you can go to one lake, one day they'll just be smashing jigging wraps, like going out of style. And then the next time you go there, they'll be there, but they won't hit them. So it's a bass get real finicky in the wintertime. And when they get fired up, though, the jigging wrap is hard to beat. And I'm sure those new Z darters will be the same thing. But also with the Z Viber, I was never, ever ripping it when I was fishing those bass. I wasn't like burp, burp like you do with the walleyes. I was just dancing it just like this, just making that bottom hook shake. And if they came in on it and didn't bite, I would just slowly raise it away from them, just like fishing crappies. And that was the juice. I mean, it was working. So, yeah, I would definitely pick some more of those up before ice season. I'm so excited for ice. I mean, I can't even tell you.
I need to get my 30th muskie, and then I think I'll be ready for ice fishing. That's my goal now.
I think you got lots of time. I mean, I'm looking at the weather, and it does not look cold for quite a while.
It looked like it was going to be cold for a while, and now out, finally switched, and it's just going to be nice out.
Yep, it's looking really good for a longer muskie season and probably a shorter ice season. But do you fish muskies right up till the bitter end, like when there's the bays are icing up and it's 20 degrees out?
I'm hoping to fish some river stuff once the lakes start getting iced up. There was a river I fished a few years ago with a friend that I started fishing a couple, like last year in the late fall, and there's just like one hole, and the muskies just sit in there. I lost 4 in one day last November, I think it was.
Oh, wow.
And that was soul crushing. It was all on suckers. 4 sucker fish just in a row, bam, 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 gone. But I have new sucker rigs this year, and I'm confident in them. I haven't lost a fish, knock on wood. But
so, what's your favorite sucker rig? What are these rigs you're talking about? Because I haven't done much sucker rigging, and I'm kind of a novice when it comes to. I'm like looking at all these rigs, and some have giant hooks, some have small hooks, some have 3 hooks, some have 2 hooks, some have nose clips, some don't. Like, what's your favorite?
So I just started using the sucker rigs by Z Leaders is the company. So they have 3 hooks, 2 trebles, and then 1 small hook for like the sucker, like the mouth or the note, the sucker.
Yeah.
And I have not lost a fish on those yet. My first fish I actually caught on that rig, the only hook it had was the small single hook right in the corner of its mouth.
Okay.
From that sucker. All the rest have been pretty much on the back treble. I've had a lot of muskies just tail biting suckers this fall, which is interesting. Usually they like to eat them head first, but most of my sucker bites have come on the back for our treble. So the trebles are kind of offset. You put one closer to the head of the sucker, one back towards the tail.
Yep.
The rig I was using the last couple years was a nose clip. So it had like the just the metal clip that went through the nose of the sucker, but the trebles weren't really staggered. They were kind of the same length. So I would try to stagger them myself, and then you have a big bow in the metal leader, and I don't know if I just didn't like it.
Yep, I get what you're saying. And that's the rig the one you just described that made the most sense to me was a single hook with 2 offset trebles. That's what I've been using. Actually, I think the one I'm using is Joe Bucher's rig that he designed, and it's same thing. 1 single hook for the mouth, and then 2 offset trebles, 1 closer to the head, 1 closer to the tail, and they're smaller hooks. Like I've learned from fishing other species of fish, downsizing your hooks is almost always a good thing. Like we used to fish shark hooks for pike, ice fishing on tip-ups. You probably did too. Like growing up, we'd use these big steel leaders and giant treble hooks.
Yep.
And I've gone down to like 20 to 30 pound fluoro and, what most people would consider walleye size treble hooks for pike. And I've caught so many more pike on that rig because there's less to spook fish and make them wary, for one thing.
Yeah.
And smaller hooks penetrate better, I think they hold better in some cases too. They don't have the leverage,
Exactly. And the one most important thing for sucker rigs, and I just kind of learned this year, so I had to go back to my old sucker rigs a few weeks ago just because I couldn't find my big rig from Z Leaders, and I had a fish eat my sucker, set the hook, fought it for a few seconds, and it came off, and it was probably a 48-inch plus muskie. I saw it. It came up by my kayak and then just sat there before it sank away. And once I looked at my rig, one of my hooks had bent out on my sucker rig.
Ouch.
So, making sure the hooks on the rigs that you buy are high quality or at least decent, because I guess I was a little naive and just figured, this is being sold as a muskie sucker rig. It should be good quality. And the hooks just are not that great on that brand.
Yep. And you got to make sure they're like 4X strong. Yeah. Because they'll sell big treble hooks, but they might be only 2X wire, and that will definitely bend out if you if you send it home with 100-pound test, I mean, that's a lot of force for a small lightweight hook. So yeah, that totally makes sense. Yep. And I've always wondered about circle hooks for muskies because we use circle hooks for saltwater fishing all the time for every, like barracuda, stuff, mackerel, stuff with super sharp teeth. And you almost always corner hook in the corner of the mouth with circle hooks. Yeah. And I have not heard of anybody really using circle hooks for pike or muskies, but I think they would work. I don't know why they wouldn't.
I think if you used smaller suckers, like much smaller size suckers, and I don't know how you'd really rig the hook on them, but I bet it would work.
I mean, guys use 12-inch mullet for snook, in saltwater, like all the time, and on circle hooks. There's different ways to rig them on circle hooks, but it can be done. But I guess in Wisconsin now it wouldn't be legal anyway, because you have to have 2 hooks.
Isn't it 8 inches or over? You have to have a quick sight.
Yep. Quick strike rig, yeah, and that's fairly recent. I think it was like last year or the year before that they enacted that. But I've been using circle hooks in freshwater for all kinds of fish and having really good luck. Like my slip bobber rigs almost always have circle hooks on them now. For walleyes, for pike, for bass, for crappies. Been using them for bluegills, like little number 8s. They're awesome because you don't have to set the hook, and the fish almost never swallow the hook. So if you want to release them with live bait, it's no problem.
Yep.
So I'm going to definitely try them more ice fishing this year too, and try them on my tip-ups because I don't see why they wouldn't work for that either.
No, I think it'd be interesting on tip-ups because you're so used to setting the hook on a tip-up. You'd almost just have to get the pressure right. I think would be different to try to finagle, but I sure once you mess around with it, you get the hang of it.
Yeah, I'm gonna experiment with it a little bit this year and see what we can come up with. But they've been working really well in open water. The reason I love them is because, like, you can fish light line, and if you get a pike, most of the time the hook goes to the corner of the mouth and they don't get the line in their teeth. So you don't lose as many rigs, you don't lose as many fish, and you can get away with light line and still catch pike, which is something I'm always trying to do.
Right. Yeah, those pike.
Yeah.
I recently switched over to fluorocarbon on my tip-ups as well. I used to run steel leaders. I used to fish bass with steel leaders just because I was scared of getting bit off. But when you run fluorocarbon, as long as you're not horsing them, usually you're pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, I've been using fluorocarbon on my pike rigs for probably 6-7 years now on my tip-ups. And I can count on one hand the number of bite-offs I've gotten. And I've caught a lot of pike, But again, small hooks, that if you're using big giant hooks with fluorocarbon, they tend to stick further back in the pike's mouth and you'll get more teeth on the line. But if you're using small hooks, they tend to pull to the edge and you'll hook them on the edge of the mouth and you don't get the line on the teeth as much either. So that's the combination I've gone to is the fluoro with smaller hooks. And that's worked really well. You get way more bites for sure. I mean, there's no question you get more bites. So.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well since switching to fluoro. I don't use huge trebles either. I kind of use the walleye or maybe just a little bit bigger treble hooks.
Now, have you used any automatic type hook setters for anything yet, like bass or anything like that?
Nope, I have not. I just recently bought an iFish Pro, which obviously isn't an automatic hook setter, but to fight stuff on a rod and reel. And I want to use that a little bit more this winter.
Yep.
I think that'll be fun, but
the autos are crazy good for bass. Bass, pike, perch, they're really good for all of them.
So light.
Yeah, I mean, I can catch a 6-inch bluegill on my jaw jacker, no problem. It's that sensitive. So it's a really good tool. And bass fishing with them so fun because, like, especially when you're really in them and you're using small shiners, it's just like pop, pop, pop. They just keep popping and you just keep yanking bass out. That's a fun time. There's so much more fun to fight on a rod, than
Yeah.
than hand lining them. Any fish really is, but so I've been using those quite a bit. So yeah, well, it's been fun chatting. We'll have to do it again during ice season and see how your ice season goes too. But we got you gave us a ton of good musky advice. Like one guy said, it's just been a really good informative session. So I appreciate it. Anything I can learn about muskies. Like I've only caught one this whole season, and it wasn't even a big one. So I still have to get one in the boat.
There's plenty of time. Like you said, the weather's going to stay halfway decent. They should be feeding good. I don't know what happened the last 5 days, but
yeah. What's your favorite late season cold water bait? Like this
right now,
this time on.
So like Tuesday, I had 2 follows on the large size swimming dog, and I really like that just because it's a big profile, but you can work it slow, and that paddle tail's still gonna kick.
Mm-hmm.
I love Red October tubes. They're like one of my favorite baits, and I had a really hot follow on that to the point where I use the shallow Red October tubes. I just works better for the areas I'm fishing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it only fishes the first few feet of the water column.
Yep.
I had a muskie so hot on it. Every time I'd rip the bait, it'd speed up on it, and it would break the surface of the water all the way back to my kayak. And unfortunately, it spooked twice at the kayak. The first time I got it to convert and come back around, but the second time I went into my shadow, it just took off. So tubes, a lot of rubber baits, tubes. The swimming dogs, I like beaver baits, like the large size beaver bait. That has been good this winter or this fall.
So you kind of tend to go away from blades then in the fall.
Yeah, this is the time where I like things that I can work slower and big pull pause style baits.
Okay, yeah, that's good to know. And when you're fishing rubber, like heavier rubber baits, are you ripping them, or are you just like swimming them and pulling them, or just pull pause, or what's your retrieve?
This time of the year, it depends. My like Red October tubes, I kind of like to rip those on slack line, like a good pop, and let it fall because it'll really walk and kind of be erratic.
Okay.
Bulldogs this time of year, I'm pulling, not really aggressive, just a sweep of the rod. But in the summer and like early season, I'm ripping them.
Okay.
Just because the fish are a little bit more aggressive and will chase stuff down.
Sure. So you just tend to slow things down a little bit now.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That's good to know. I got to tell you one quick story before we go. So
yeah.
I haven't, like I said, I haven't done a ton of muskie fishing. I've always had the gear and never the time, but we went camping one time on the Chippewa Flowage, and I couldn't bring my boat because I had a camper along. So I threw the canoe up on top of the camper, and I had my muskie stuff, and I'm like, I've never fished the Chippewa Flowage ever, and I'm like, I'll try muskie fishing. I mean, I know it's a muskie area, it's kind of world famous for muskies, and so I paddle out like right in front of the campground, just paddle out there. I'm like, I'll just throw some kind of rubber. I think it was a bulldog, actually. It was like a mid-sized bulldog. So I just chuck it out there, and I'm like in a canoe thinking, oh, this is tricky, right? Well, about 2 twitches into my very first cast into the Chippewa Flowage ever in my entire life, I got smoked by like a 45-inch muskie, like 2 twitches in on my very first cast into the Flowage. And I was so not ready for it. And I'm in a canoe, like I don't know how to set the hook right. There's no muscle memory whatsoever. And I did exactly like you were just saying. I set the hook, I went back and rolled back. And then I had no way to make up the slack. I mean, there was no way I was making up the slack. And I tried, but that fish came out of the water, and he shook his head, and it was gone.
Yeah.
But like that, I'll never forget that. Because it was so crazy to just like paddle out there in the Chippewa Flowage and get a bite on your first cast. And then I fished for like 4 hours, and of course never saw another fish. But
yeah, that sounds about right. And canoes are canoes are scarier than my kayak, I think. I've fished in a canoe a few times for muskies, and they're just so tippy.
Yep.
Depending on, I guess, what kind of canoe you have. But the one I was in was just like, you're just like teetering. One wrong move and everything's over.
Yeah, it wasn't an ideal situation for sure, but I just thought you'd get a kick out of that. Because I know you fished the chip some, I'm assuming.
So I've only fished it. So I've been a presenter at Ladies Muskie School up at Deerfoot Lodge and Resort 3 years now. So those are the 3 times I've ever fished the flowage.
Okay.
My first time up there, I did get, I think it was a 42 or a 44 on a bulldog.
Lost your audio for a
we
second.
had a muskie eat my sucker shortly after I caught that 44. And there was a girl that had never caught a muskie before, so I let her take the sucker rod, and unfortunately we lost that fish. But then this last Saturday, actually, I was up there, and that's when I dropped my sucker down. I went up in the river. Ty Sennett kind of pointed me in the right direction. So I got to a deep hole, dropped my sucker down, and I'm not kidding, and my bobber hit the water, and 17 seconds later it went down, and that muskie I caught recently, it ate that fast, and then nothing the rest of the day.
Okay.
So there must be something about chipoflage muskies where they're just like one and done.
Yeah, it must be. Yeah. Oh, and that one fish you caught earlier with the crazy green head.
Yeah.
That thing was so cool. That's one of the most unique looking muskies I've ever seen. Like, what was up with that thing?
I don't know. That's the weirdest looking fish I've ever caught out of that lake. And it was the coolest. It was the coolest catch I think I've had just about ever. I was fishing with my buddy, and I was working that big beaver bait in. And this fish followed my bait in, and I'm figure eighting. And into the beaver bait, you kind of just like gentle pull pause, and that tail flutters nice every time you kind of pause it and it falls. And it followed probably 8 turns of the 8, lazy, but followed. Well, while that was happening, the boat was kind of drifting. My buddy's watching me like, what the heck? And all of a sudden it transitioned to the sucker. Well, the sucker line got under the motor, so it was tangled under the motor. So it's trying to chase the sucker. The sucker can't go anywhere. So I untangled the line from the motor, and this muskie's right behind the sucker. And I'm figure eighting the sucker at this point. And the muskie's just like mouthing the water, like tasting the water behind the sucker. It was the coolest thing to see. And it would go up to the sucker and bump it.
Yep.
It wouldn't bite it. It would just like mouth kind of open, bump the sucker, and the sucker would swim. This happened for over 2 minutes of it just like tasting the water, bumping the sucker. And then all of a sudden I kind of brought the sucker around in front of the muskie, so it was right in front of the muskie, and it just T-boned it. Finally, after 2 minutes, and I'm losing my mind at this point. Just like, it's so crazy to see them like hunting. This is what they do. So my buddy, we gave it a little bit of time, because when I watched it T-bone the sucker, it didn't really get the hooks in its mouth very well. So we followed it for maybe like a minute and got the boat positioned, and got her in the net. And just the dark, her whole face was like pitch black, like her mouth, and then green, and then that red towards the tail. Just like you said, she was like fire tiger colored.
Yeah, that's what I thought of the second I saw it.
That's the best description, because I don't know.
I
don't know if it's just like the water she came out of. It's not that dirty of a water lake. It's kind of a little tannic, but pretty clear. I don't know if she was just sitting somewhere funny. And
well, it's funny how unique muskies can be. You know what I mean? Like some of them in some lakes are like cookie cutter. They all look exactly the same, but then in some lakes they all look different. You know, that always blows my mind how different muskies can look from each other. You know, you've got spotted muskies, you've got more barred muskies, you've got light muskies, you've got dark muskies. It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, and this lake, the muskies are typically a little darker, but never seen one to that extent.
Yeah, that was really cool. Really cool. Well, I'll let you go.
All right.
I could talk fishing forever, as you probably could, but we definitely have to catch up later in the ice season at some point.
Yeah.
And you know, it's been really fun doing these lives. I've been doing them probably about, I don't know, 8 months, 6, 7, 8 months. I started them last ice season, later in the season, but I'm starting to get a few more people more like you who are more active on social media and just like kind of just talking about how we catch fish, basically. You know, it's really every one of these I've learned stuff, and it's been really fun.
That's like the beautiful thing about fishing, I think, is it's ever evolving, and you learn something almost every day you go out on the water. Every time you fish with someone new, there's always something to learn. So that's one thing I really love about it.
Yeah, and the same with social media. Like, there's so many negative people on social media about social media. There's so much negativity, but if you just look for the good stuff, social media is awesome. Like, I think it's amazing that we can connect like this and talk about fishing with a whole bunch of people joining the conversation, and we don't even have to leave our house. Like, it's just it's so cool to me. I just love it. I think it's awesome. I love when you can just like appreciate and learn from one another. Like, some people see social media as a competition, and it's just like, no, we're just all here posting about what we love to do. Let's just share the knowledge. Yeah, oh, for sure. And any of you still watching, make sure you follow Nicole's page. She's got lots of good stuff. I'm sure you'll have plenty more this ice season, and maybe we'll get out fishing together sometime too.
Yeah.
You know, I know Ben's talking about doing a Euro tackle meetup at some point. So
that would be awesome.
That would be really fun to meet everybody on that team. And
you
know, I'm sure we'll run into each other eventually too. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah.
I mean, we kind of fish the same area, so.
Yeah.
So cool. All right.
Appreciate. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. And we're seeing here lots of other people are commenting how awesome this was and just educational. And so lots of other people enjoyed it as well. So thanks again.
Awesome.
All right. Have a good night. Tight lines.
You too.
We'll see you guys.
Bye.